Today in this video, I'm going to do a little discussion on the initial setup of a ventilator, specifically for these COVID-19 patients. Now, this video is not meant at all to fully teach someone about a ventilator. This video is more of a little bit of a refresher. If you haven't set one up in a while, maybe you're a respiratory therapist or a physician who hasn't set one up in a while. Or maybe you're an RN that's having to do a little double duty right now, which is sad, but we appreciate it. We got to do what we do right now, right? So this is more of to help you get started. And remember, mostly you follow the physician's orders. So what I want to do first is do a couple of real quick definitions, because the language we use in the hospital to communicate together is very important. There's basically two types of ventilation on a ventilator that we use mostly for a person with COVID-19, for example, or most sick patients who need a ventilator. Those two main types of ventilation are pressure control ventilation and volume limited ventilation. I'm going to tell you the difference between the two. Volume limited ventilation is where you set a tidal volume on the ventilator, and that tidal volume is going to be delivered no matter what to that patient. If you set 350 milliliters tidal volume, that patient's going to get 350 milliliters. But the pressure it would take to get that volume is variable based on the compliance or stiffness of a person's lungs. So if a person has a very stiff lung and we set up a tidal volume of 350, they're going to get 350. But that pressure, because they're stiff, may be way up there, like 50, 60 centimeters of water pressure to deliver, to be able to get that. You remember the trick with the brand new balloon? It's real stiff and you have to blow real hard. It takes more pressure, but it doesn't give more volume. It gives the volume you give. That's why we stretch them out and make them loose, and then the pressure takes a lot less to open it, so the balloon is more compliant. That's exactly the same thing with a lung. So these COVID-19 patients get real stiff, and so it takes higher pressures to get a volume. So the other type of ventilation, pressure control, is quite the opposite. We set an initial pressure, and that pressure is going to be given. But then the volume is variable. So let's say we give 15 milliliters of pressure to a patient. You watch their tidal volume, and let's say, for example, their tidal volume goes up to 200, but the doctor ordered he wanted 350. Well, after a minute or two of watching, if they stay around 200 or so, you know you got to turn the pressure up a little. So you go slow. You turn it up maybe to 17. Or 18, you watch, and you wait a minute or two, give the time for everything to cycle, and watch the tidal volume until you go up on the pressure until you meet the tidal volume that the doctor's ordered. So that's pressure control ventilation. That is the type of ventilation that I would recommend if you're putting a brand new COVID-19 patient on a ventilator right now, probably because they're already getting stiff if they got this far to be on a ventilator. But you follow the doctor's orders. Let's say the doctor still orders the type of ventilation to be volume limited, and he orders a tidal volume of, say, 350 milliliters. Well, keep an eye on those pressures, because if the peak inspiratory pressures start to increase, then you know the patient's getting stiffer or less compliant, and you want to make sure the doctor knows that. That's a sign they're getting worse. And of course, on the opposite, when a person's pressures start to come down and they're still getting the same tidal volume, they're getting better. So you can watch it for weaning purposes too. So it's important here that I wanted to say those are types of ventilation. A lot of people confuse with modes. So I'm just going to say right now, my interpretation as an easy explanation for what a mode of ventilation is. A mode, think of how you want the patient to be involved in the breathing. For example, assist control mode, the patient can initiate a breath, but then the ventilator gives that breath, that amount of pressure or that amount of tidal volume. So you can be on pressure control ventilation and then set a mode of assist control. But let's say how you want the patient to be involved in the breathing is to do a lot more themselves or initiate more and actually get their own volume. Well, then that would be maybe SIMV mode, synchronized intermittent mandatory ventilation. Then in that mode, you will set a number of breaths per minute. So let's say you set 15, and the patient does his own breathing and he's doing all 15. Well, then that's fine. But if the patient's only doing 10, then the other 5 are going to be given by the ventilator. So your patient's going to get those 15 breaths, no matter what. But in this case, SIMV, how do you want the patient to be involved in the breathing would be to do more of it themselves. In most cases, when they're first put on, a lot of the doctors like to put on assist control because it takes less stress on the body and the lungs gives the patient a break so the ventilator can do more of the breathing and let them heal. Then the next day they'll look at them and maybe want to change over and let them do a little more and switch to SIMV, let them do a little more. It all depends on the patient and how they're getting better or not. One of the other common modes, how the patient should be involved in the breathing here, is CPAP mode. And people say, oh, I thought that was a CPAP machine. Well, CPAP machine only does this. On the ventilator, you switch to CPAP mode, and it acts like a CPAP machine. You set a positive expiratory end pressure, so when the patient exhales right at the end, it doesn't let the alveoli close all the way. If you set 10 centimeters of CPAP, then there's going to be an end expiratory pressure of 10 to keep those alveoli open. This mode, the patient does all the breathing. It's just they have that little extra pressure to keep the alveoli open. So this mode typically would be used as a weaning. So you would go, say for example, they're bad off, you put them on assist control mode, type of ventilation, pressure control, and then the patient starts to get better. Their pressures start to come down, but they're still getting good tidal volumes. So eventually doctors, we want to wean them off. So let's put them on CPAP, see how they breathe all on their own. And you watch them. Maybe even do a blood gas, see how their CO2 is and their oxygen. And then you could go from there to extubation if you want. It depends on the doctor's orders, but mode again is how you want the patient to be involved in the breathing. The type of ventilation is, in this case, either pressure controlled ventilation or volume limited. Okay? So let's start with a good example, but we'll wrap this up. The doctor orders the patient to be on tidal volume of 350 milliliters of volume at a rate of 15, and he wants his oxygen at 50%, and let's give him a PEEP to go with that at 5. So the PEEP again is for oxygenation, and it's a positive end expiratory pressure to help. It goes along with the mode of ventilation to try to help keep the alveoli from closing as well. And so you set those things, and you watch the patient, and they're on volume limited because the doctor ordered a tidal volume. But then you notice these peak pressures are really high, 50, 60, to get that 350 milliliters of tidal volume. Go talk to the doctor, explain. You may want to switch over to pressure control ventilation. So then, if that's the case, you look at those peak pressures that patient was doing to get those tidal volume of 350. And when you switch over to pressure control, you want to start somewhere below that peak pressure. So let's say it took 40 centimeters of water pressure, inspiratory peak pressures, to get a 350 milliliter tidal volume that the doctor ordered. When you switch over to pressure control, start out at about 25 or 30 of pressure and watch the patient's tidal volumes. If they're higher than the 350, come down on that pressure and go slow. Remember to wait a minute or two though to make sure you get the patient to cycle through so you can get a good minute volume. And real quick, just let me refresh what minute volume is. It's pretty simple, but I want to say it again. Minute volume is the tidal volume times your respiratory rate in a minute. So if you're getting, for easy math, 400 tidal volume and a rate of 20. 20 times 400 is 8,000. You put that in milliliters. Patient has got a minute volume of 8.0 liters per minute, okay? And so that's the minute volume. So minute volume is one of the most important things because it determines the patient's CO2. So remember that. The more they breathe out and exhale and get rid of that CO2, they can get that CO2 lower. So minute volume is super important to watch. So you go to you watch the patient, you've switched over to pressure control ventilation, and now you started at say 25 or 30 pressure, which was lower than what they were with peak pressures on the volume limited, and they're getting 300 tidal volume. Well, then you could go up a little on the pressure, go slow, until you meet and talk to the doctor. He may say, doctor, I'm at 30 and he's getting 310. The doctor may say, that's good enough for right now. We're doing good. Let's wait an hour and get a blood gas. You listen to the doctor and follow those orders. But that's the basics of what you're trying to do here. And remember, weaning starts right after you put them on the ventilator. And then what that means is you start watching the patient. So when they start to get a little better, you can start weaning down. And you want to get that patient maybe to CPAP mode. And then if they do well, oxygen and everything, you may be able to extubate them. And I hope it goes well. So just remember, this was just a refresher if you haven't done it in a while, or maybe to help if you're a nurse to assisting. We appreciate that. Just initial ventilator setup. Every ventilator is different as far as looks, but they all have those things that I just told you. So you just have to figure out where, once you familiarize yourself with where those buttons are and things to set those settings, okay? I can't help you with that because it depends on the ventilator you're using. If you do have questions about a certain ventilator, maybe you could leave a comment, and if I can, I'll get back to it. If I'm familiar with that ventilator, maybe I can help out. Or maybe someone watching this, therapist or other people, can help you with those things. Also, check out on Facebook. I have a respiratory therapist site on Facebook I've had for several years. We've got hundreds and hundreds of members from all over the world, and they really can help you with any questions. You go on there, it's a free sign up, just sign up and then ask your questions. Also, if you know the answer to some, please also help people out with those, okay? We're going to wrap this up now and say God bless you and take care of yourself, and we appreciate all the healthcare people and what they're doing right now during this time. Take care and stay safe.